Hello, this is Margaret Mack, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 24th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. I may abbreviate some articles in order to get more news coverage in the hour. And we'll start with a front page article written by Tyler Pager, reporting from Washington. As Vance leads Iran negotiations, Trump creates disruption in his path. Vice President J.D. Vance is in a politically precarious spot. As Vice President J.D. Vance entered the fifth hour of negotiations with Iranian leaders over the weekend, President Trump weighed in with an ill-timed threat to start bombing again. If the Iranians close the Strait of Hormuz, Mr. Trump told a Fox News reporter, the negotiators talking to Mr. Vance would never make it back to their country. In fact, they would have no country to return to at all. For Mr. Vance, this was the latest example of his increasingly tricky role as the front man in the U.S. negotiations with Iran, as Mr. Trump repeatedly creates disruption in his path. On Monday, Mr. Vance said the first round of talks had laid a successful foundation for peace. But now, Mr. Vance will have to find a way to end a war that he opposed at the start while negotiating his boss's whims and an adversary that has proved itself, at least in part, immune to Mr. Trump's threats. What we told the Iranians yesterday is when you guys engage in what us millennials might call trash talk, you can't expect the President of the United States not to respond and not to correct the record, he said on Monday at a news conference. So when they say things that aren't true, the President's going to respond to it. Both sides have signed a memorandum of understanding to end hostilities and are now trying to strike a lasting nuclear deal in 60 days. But for Mr. Vance, the presumptive favorite for the 2028 Republican nomination, the situation remains politically precarious. If it works out, I'm going to take the credit, Mr. Trump said of the peace deal last week. If it doesn't work out, I'm blaming J.D. Mr. Vance has said the president was joking, but Mr. Trump has never shied away from deflecting blame onto others. And how Mr. Vance handles the future of the negotiations will factor into Republicans' performance in the midterm election and his future as a potential successor to Mr. Trump. Karim Sajapur, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, said Mr. Vance was in a risky spot. He could get credit for ending an unpopular war, Mr. Sajapur said, or he may end up being viewed as the architect of an American humiliation and a deal that concedes billions of dollars to a committed U.S. adversary. Making the situation even more difficult, the vice president must depend on the cooperation of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corporation commanders. That is not an auspicious position for any American politician, let alone an aspiring president. And even as Americans are clamoring for the Trump administration to stop the fighting and bring down energy costs, Mr. Sajapur argued that Americans seem to care more about how wars end. He pointed out that President Joseph Biden Jr. nosedived in the polls after the withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan, during which 13 U.S. service members were killed. Americans dislike wars, but they dislike defeats even more, he said. Almost immediately after Mr. Vance left Switzerland, the foundation he outlined as a possible long-term deal started showing cracks. The vice president said Iran had agreed to invite UN nuclear inspectors into the country, but the Iranians said they had made no new commitments. Mr. Vance also described a potential funding scheme in which Qatar would unfreeze assets for the Iranians to use to buy American soy, corn, and wheat. Hours later, Mr. Trump repeated the idea in the Oval Office and said food for the Iranian population was going to be bought exclusively through the United States from our farmers. Iranian officials rejected that idea and have said in the past that the money will be going toward rebuilding its infrastructure. Conflicting narratives about the state of the negotiations have become commonplace in recent weeks as American and Iranian officials try to appease their domestic audiences and bring an end to the conflict. Mr. Vance tried to downplay the public disagreements. I would just encourage the media, mistrust a little bit what you see coming out of Iranian social media, he told reporters before boarding Air Force Two to return to Washington. They can be confusing negotiators, but we feel like we're making progress. It was a marked different tone than Mr. Vance's last face-to-face meeting with the Iranians when he spent 21 hours in Pakistan and left with bad news and said they were not able to make headway. As Mr. Vance works to balance the negotiations and his own political future, Mr. Trump has been quizzing aides and allies over the last several months about whether they think Mr. Vance has what it takes to win the presidency. He often compares him to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and he will have another opportunity to size up the two men this week when Mr. Rubio heads to the Persian Gulf to discuss the Iran deal with allies. And this next piece is a news analysis by Michael Shear and Megan Specka. Britain is still deep in the shadow of Brexit. 10 years after a slim majority voted to leave the European Union, the economic and political effects of that decision continue to disrupt the United Kingdom. A decade ago, British voters went to the polls with a singular image fresh in their minds: a ubiquitous red bus, the hallmark of the Brexit campaign, imploring residents of the once sprawling empire to take back control by severing ties to Europe. By a slim margin on June 23, 2016, Britons voted to leave the European Union. The people, politicians, and businesses of the United Kingdom have been reckoning with the consequences of that decision ever since. Trade, travel, work, study, taxes, borders, the price of groceries, national pride, almost no part of life escaped untouched by the Brexit referendum in the 10 years since the votes were cast. On Monday, the forces of Brexit claimed their latest political victim when Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced his resignation, becoming the sixth British leader since the referendum whose tenure was cut short. While he made unforced errors, he was also felled by a series of challenges established long before he arrived in office. The economy is sluggish, a condition economists attributed to the effects of severing ties with Europe, along with the enduring consequences of the 2008 global financial crisis, which drove up government debt, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Opportunities to work and live abroad are more limited. Travel is frustrating. Trade with Europe has continued, but at a lower level, with British exports to the bloc down about 12%, according to the Center for European Reform, a research group. Immigration from outside the European Union went way up for a time after the then conservative government tried to fill worker shortages in healthcare and home care, and foreign students were welcomed by cash-poor British universities. But after the rise caused voter anger, the government introduced new restrictions on migration, and it has since fallen sharply. Perhaps no part of British society was changed more by Brexit than its political landscape, which has fractured into a chaotic tug-of-war in which no party seems able to satisfy the demands of an angry and disillusioned public for long. It is political instability that has best characterized the past decade. Jill Rutter, a senior fellow at Britain's Institute for Government, wrote in Brexit at 10, a report published on Tuesday. There is a major uphill task facing any government in restoring faith in the capacity of the state to deliver. The revolving door of Downing Street began when David Cameron, who called the referendum, resigned after the result. Each prime minister that followed has struggled with the consequences of Brexit, dimmed economic prospects, the fact that it bestowed no special benefits from its so-called special relationship with the United States, and that it has failed to restore any kind of British supremacy around the world. For all of the competence questions about Keir Starmer, the challenges that he has faced as a prime minister come back to the economy not having grown since 2019, said Ruth Curtis, the chief executive of the Resolution Foundation, a research institute. Speaking at a conference hosted by UK in a Changing Europe, another research group, on Tuesday, she said, the extent to which that is driven by Brexit is also fundamental. The years of political turmoil since have had real-world consequences for a country desperate for long-term solutions to its problems. The turnover of prime ministers prevents big, ambitious reforms from being executed, said Rob Ford, a professor of political science at the University of Manchester. It's like if you were trying to write a novel and every 6 months your PC would wipe the hard drive and you had to just scramble together all the notes you had and try to do it again. Andy Burnham, the popular former mayor of Greater Manchester, who looks almost certain to succeed Mr. Starmer, will be the next in line to confront the country's post-Brexit challenges. A member of Mr. Starmer's Labour Party, he is seen by many as ideologically similar but more charismatic and better able to tell a compelling story to voters. Whether that will be enough to overcome the Brexit ruptures and the political instability is unclear. In his resignation speech on Monday morning, Mr. Starmer spoke with pride of standing with Ukraine, standing up for our values, and rebuilding our relationship with our allies in Europe. He leaves office with that last part unfinished, and his country still struggling with the divisions that Brexit created. In the conclusion of the report by the Institute for Government, the author and former government advisor Sam Friedman wrote that the Labour Party under Mr. Burnham could seek to reopen the question of membership in the European Union, though this would come with obvious risks, not least repolarizing society even more aggressively second time around. It is one of the very few issues that both appeals to left and center voters and would unquestionably drive economic growth, he wrote. At some point in the future, he said, it may seem a justifiable roll of the dice. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And next in international news, an article by Elaine Pelter. Elaine Pelter interviewed a dozen female entrepreneurs, business owners, and trade representatives across Afghanistan's largest cities for this story. The women running businesses under Taliban rules. With secondary education and most jobs out of reach, thousands of Afghan women have turned to entrepreneurship as the only path to make money and maintain a social life. The Taliban have imposed some of the world's toughest restrictions on women and girls. But to ward off economic collapse and isolation, they have let women start businesses in Afghanistan as long as they comply with a cascade of debilitating rules. More than 10,000 Afghan women have business licenses. a tenfold increase in the past 5 years, according to the Afghanistan Chamber of Commerce and Industry. With another estimated 120,000 working without licenses, small businesses are the largest employers of Afghan women, according to the World Bank. But that apparent boom does little to hide the shrinking horizons for women's lives. Those who dreamed of becoming lawyers, engineers, or university professors have turned to carpet weaving, cosmetics, or vocational training because they cannot work in government administration or for many nonprofits. They also cannot run beauty salons, study midwifery or nursing, or speak with male clients, suppliers, or banking officials. A vast majority of Afghan women do not work outside the home at all. Less than 7% of Afghan women were employed as of 2024, according to the UN Development Program. Those who do work have faced growing hurdles. The harassment and arrest of dozens of women by the morality police in June led to a rare public protest. Still, as the Taliban approached the 5-year anniversary of their return to power, Afghan women have turned to entrepreneurship as one of the last ways they can support their households and find a semblance of social life. The only remaining hope for women in Afghanistan is business, said Bajna Shavjun, a representative of female business owners in the province of Herat. On a recent morning in a warehouse in Mazar-e-Sharif in northern Afghanistan, some 60 women knotted, trimmed, and wove rugs under the watch of their boss, Nashira Azizi, 19 years old. Miss Azizi was 14 when the Taliban swept back to power in 2021 and later barred millions of girls like her from studying beyond 6th grade. I fell into depression, Miss Azizi said about the ban on education. At home, you see the same faces all the time. The rug workshop opened up her world. Here, there are at least more topics to discuss, more motivation to get the job done. Ms. Azizi launched her business with financial support from the UN Development Program, including a grant to create jobs for Afghan women who have been expelled from neighboring Iran and Pakistan in recent years. She now has about 450 workers in 2 workshops and at home. Her 2 brothers handle the rugs design and the marketing. Her father runs one of the workshops where male employees clean the rugs before they are sold. The rest, management, human resources, finances, falls to Mrs. Azizi. The business license is under my name, she said. We need bigger pots. Rose Rezgai, 21, said she had dreamed of becoming a mining engineer before the Taliban took over Afghanistan. Unable to pursue that field, she taught English. But the Taliban government cracked down on private tutoring and her students dwindled. In 2022, she founded Magnolia, a soap business in Herat, one of Afghanistan's largest cities. It now sustains her family of 7, she said. The smell of turmeric wafted over Miss Razi's workshop on a recent afternoon as her mother stirred the simmering, gooey matter that would become soap. Rows of saffron-infused soap bars and dropper bottles filled with black seed oil sat in an adjacent room. The setup remains rustic, 2 large stock pots, no automation. But her eyes on Iran and Pakistan as the next frontiers for her business, which she wants to turn into an international brand by 2030. An avid reader of psychology and management books, she spoke as 24 certificates and online diplomas pinned to a wall over her. We need bigger pots and some machines, Ms. Razai said. A bee queen defies the rules. This is one of the good things about the Taliban. The government is active in supporting women businesses, and yet we face more restrictions by the day. Ganja Karmini, 39, the stories of female entrepreneurs in Afghanistan come with countless caveats. Ms. Razai cannot travel alone to Kabul, the capital, to sell her soap. She needs a male companion. Ms. Azizi cannot advertise the care and finesse put into the rug-making process to male clients. They often have to rely on their husbands, fathers, or brothers to do business, or they defy Taliban restrictions. In Herat, Ganja Karmini, 39, a beekeeper, said she sometimes dresses as a man when she travels to the outskirts of the city to tend her bees. With her husband struggling to find jobs as a day laborer, the honey Miss Karmini produces from her 50 beehives makes up a significant portion of the family's income. She is now known locally as the Bee Queen of Afghanistan. But sales slumped in 2023 when the Taliban ordered her to stop receiving male clients in her shop, she said. Twice in recent years, she lost her bees. Once after the Taliban takeover, when many women stayed at home out of fear, and again in 2023 when she was imprisoned for 20 days after a brawl with a Tali official over limitations on women. I'm the controller. Afghan authorities say they encourage women to pursue vocational training programs, and they are also encouraging businesses to hire more of them as long as the women respect the principles of the country. This, according to Samuel Ibrahimi, the spokesperson for the Afghan Ministry of Work and Social Affairs. But critics say these measures are nowhere near enough. When asked about key programs for women, Mr. Ibrahimi referred to a Committee for Economic Empowerment that he said had provided work for 26 women this year in a country of nearly 45 million people. Our mothers used to tell us that they worked hard so our future would be better and more peaceful, said Fabra Nouri, the acting head of Afghanistan's Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Our future did not become better or more peaceful. Now we tell our own children the same thing, but I don't think that will happen. Families and conservative values are ever-present obstacles. Wahida Noorji, 41, said she faced years of domestic abuse from her husband because of her professional ambitions. She has a master's degree, but her husband, she said, does not know how to read or write. But after fighting, you become the queen of the family, she said. Now all the girls in my family are at school, and my brothers say my daughter should be like you. Ms. Norzi now manages 24 female employees with hearing impairments at the Norwegian Afghanistan Committee, a nonprofit promoting access to health care and economic inclusion. And her husband follows her guidance on their 2 daughters' education, she said. Ms. Raji started Magnolia Soap when her family was in deep financial trouble. Her father, Char Razi, had driven several businesses to bankruptcy in the past. Yet in a lengthy interview at the family home, Mr. Razizi claimed credit for the brand's success. I'm in charge of the marketing, and that is what matters the most. If she's a television, I'm the controller. that can make her into a channel I want. As restrictions pile up, some female entrepreneurs say the risk of doing business are simply getting too high. Miss Karimi, the beekeeper, was imprisoned when her daughter was only 7. When she returned, her daughter told her, "Mommy, are you really released or am I dreaming?" After that episode, Miss Karimi said, "I told myself, even if the Taliban hits me on the head, I will not raise my head again." About the author Ilan Pelter, 10 times more women run businesses in Afghanistan under the Taliban today than under the previous U.S.-backed government. That paradox is at the heart of our story. We wanted to understand what drives these entrepreneurs, the barriers they face, and the dreams they fight for in a country where most jobs are out of reach and girls cannot study beyond 6th grade. As one representative for female business owners told us, the only remaining hope for women in Afghanistan is business. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And next up in national politics, an article by Nicholas Fandos. Mandami allies sweep New York primaries. Mayor Zohran Mandami and his allies swept a series of congressional primaries in New York City on Tuesday in a remarkable show of strength for the insurgents left that sent shockwaves through the Democratic Party. Mr. Mandami's candidates toppled a pair of incumbents backed by the city's political establishment, including major labor unions and the House Democratic leader. Another candidate, backed by the mayor, won an open house seat, and a handful of Democratic Socialist challengers he supported were winning down the ballot. For months, Mr. Mandami threw himself and his energized political organization into the 3 marquee congressional contests, campaigning late into the night in the race's final days and calling the election a referendum on the direction of the party. After the winning candidates shared Mr. Mandami's progressive economic platform, and they each ran campaigns that focused intently on ending American support for Israel, a sign of how far public opinion has shifted on the issue, even in New York. Late Tuesday night, the mayor stood beaming at a victory party in Brooklyn, where supporters chanted, "Free, free Palestine," and DSA, after embracing many of the same advisors who led his own successful campaign last year. He declared a new chapter in our party's history. A year ago, it was not the end of a political movement, he said. It was the beginning. Mr. Mandami's deep involvement amounted to an audacious gamble for a brand new mayor trying to lead an already fractious city. He alienated key allies along the way, but the payoffs were far-reaching. At home, the outcome will now cement him as the unquestioned political kingpin of the nation's cultural and financial capital, and the Democratic Socialist of America as a formidable force. The results also shook the foundations of the Democratic Party far beyond the 5 boroughs. When they are certified, Mr. Mandami, 34, and his movement will be on track to double the number of socialists in Congress from 2 to 4. The outcome will also force the Democratic Party, already searching for its identity, to reckon with its ascendant, unapologetic left. "It's seismic," said John Paul Lupo, a Democratic consultant who was a top advisor to the city's last progressive mayor, Bill de Blasio. The races do not necessarily suggest Mr. Mandami has expanded his appeal. Each of the contests in which he endorsed took place in areas where the mayor won comfortably in last year's election and remains deeply popular. But Tuesday's results showed 2 things about his young mayoralty. Mr. Mandami has a high tolerance for political risk-taking, well beyond that of any of his modern predecessors, and, at least for now, he has the ability to transfer his high-wattage political brand onto other candidates in a way that only a few politicians in any office have been able to do. And the next article is on economics, written by Dashi Wakabashi, Jason Karinian, and Aria Soni. Dasha reports from Seoul, Jason from London, and Arini from New York. Tech stocks dive unnerving sell-off in global markets. Chip makers led the way down in South Korea, where the main index plunged 10.5%. The NASDAQ in the U.S. was down 2.2%. Global stock markets shuddered on Tuesday, dragged down by tech companies, as investors suggested that enthusiasm for artificial intelligence companies may be approaching its limits. The firm at the forefront of AI and chip making have an outsized impact on market benchmarks. After a long, if sometimes volatile, rally pushed indexes to record highs, a sell-off in these shares that started in the United States on Monday reverberated around the world, shifting investors' focus away from the war in Iran, oil prices, interest rates, and other concerns that have influenced the market of late. Some of the biggest American tech companies, including Alphabet, continue to fall on Tuesday on top of losses the day before. SpaceX stock continued to lag after its post-IPO pop. Elon Musk rocket and AI company has shed another 20% of its value in the past week, erasing roughly $600 billion in market value. The stock finished up nearly 1% on Tuesday in a session of volatile trading at around $156 a share. The S&P 500 was down roughly 1.4% when trading closed in the United States on Tuesday. The tech-heavy NASDAQ was down 2.2%. If today's price action points to AI exhaustion, fears will grow concerning the global economy's ability to generate a clear and diversified growth narrative amid tighter funding and fiscal constraints, said Geoffrey Yu, a strategist at BNY in London. The most eye-catching decline on Tuesday took place in South Korea, the world's best-performing stock market since the start of 2025. The country's benchmark KOSPI index fell 10.5% at one point, setting off a 20-minute trading halt by the exchange operator. The surge in South Korea's stock market over the past year was mainly fueled by the country's two largest memory chip makers, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, whose semiconductors are critical to AI systems. As their shares have skyrocketed, retail investors have piled into the market, driving large and unpredictable swings in the market. Shares of both tech giants plunged more than 12% on Tuesday. That put a small dent in a remarkable run, with both stocks more than doubling this year. Alexander Redmond, chief equity strategist at the brokerage CLSA, said that in the past, such a big one-day drop would cause panic, but now it's treated as a regular feature of the market. It's unnerving that you're seeing this kind of volatility, he told reporters at the company's investor conference in Seoul. It just feels very, very frothy. He added that it was hard to say whether this meant South Korean shares would bounce back soon or if it was the beginning of the end. In Japan, stocks fell 3.6%, while markets in Taiwan and Hong Kong were down more than 1%. In Europe, the Stock 600, an index that tracks the region's largest companies, fell nearly 1%. Semiconductor companies, including STM Microelectronics of Switzerland, Infineon of Germany, and ASML of the Netherlands, posted sharp declines. The heady valuations of AI stocks has prompted many analysts to revisit the boom and bust cycle in tech stocks in the late 1990s. The death on Monday of Alan Greenspan, who coined the term irrational exuberance to describe the dot-com boom when he was chairman of the Federal Reserve, also revived memories of that time. Despite an acceleration in the investment boom, strong profit growth has mostly prevented 1990s-style imbalances from emerging. Dominic Wilson and Vicky Chang of Goldman Sachs wrote in a recent research report. But outside of AI-related areas, the overall economy looks much less robust than in the 1990s, they noted. That amplifies the effects of macroeconomic shocks and makes markets especially vulnerable to any challenges to the optimistic AI macro story, the analysis added. The biggest recent shock to the global economy, the rise in oil prices after the outbreak of war in Iran, continued to moderate on Tuesday. The price of Brent crude, the global benchmark for oil, slipped slightly to $77 a barrel, although still higher from pre-war levels. The price of oil has fallen for several weeks, reducing the squeeze on household and business budgets. U.S. gasoline prices were flat on Tuesday at a national average of $3.93 a gallon, according to the AAA Motor Club. That said, the cost for drivers has increased 32% since the war began. The Trump administration temporarily lifted oil sanctions against Iran on Monday, a U.S. policy reversal that could help ease the flow of oil around the world. On Tuesday, conflicting accounts emerged over whether Iran had agreed to open its damaged nuclear facilities to inspectors as part of negotiations. And the latest data showed an increase in shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the vital waterway for oil and gas supplies from the Persian Gulf. And next in national news, an article by Lauren McCarthy. The U.S. will investigate why a Tesla crashed into a Texas house. The car's driver assistance system was in use when the crash killed a woman on Friday, the police said. The Maine Federal Auto Safety Agency said on Monday that it was investigating a Tesla crash that killed a woman in Katy, Texas, near Houston on Friday night. The driver was using Tesla's automated driver assistance system when his Model 3 left the road at a high rate of speed and struck a home, local officials said. A woman in the home, Martha Avila, 76, was taken by medical helicopter to a hospital where she was pronounced dead, the Harris County Sheriff's Office said in a statement on Saturday. The driver did not show signs of intoxication, the official said. A spokesman for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the division of the Department of Transportation that opened the federal investigation, said he could not provide details. According to the agency's website, such special crash investigations are intended to examine accidents that happen under unusual circumstances. A Tesla executive who is in charge of the company's artificial intelligence software said on X late on Monday that the driver manually overrode self-driving by pressing the accelerator. He added that the car had accelerated to 73 miles per hour. Tesla did not respond to a request before a comment. No charges have been brought against the driver. The sheriff's office said once all evidence has been gathered, it will be presented to the Harris County District Attorney's Office to determine whether charges are appropriate. A representative for the office said in an email. Miss Avila's daughter, Jennifer Barbeau, told KHOU, a Houston television station, that she did not know where to place blame. I don't know if it's his fault or the car's fault or what really happened, she said, adding, I've never seen a car go that fast. The company's driver assistant system, autopilot, and full self-driving has been implicated in a number of accidents, some of them fatal. In 2023, Tesla recalled more than 2 million vehicles after federal regulators said the company had not done enough to ensure that drivers remain attentive when using autopilot, a system that can steer, accelerate, and brake cars automatically. Tesla owner manuals tell drivers that they should keep their hands on the wheel and take over if anything goes wrong while using autopilot or full self-driving. But lawsuits and police reports have documented cases in which drivers became distracted and failed to intervene before an accident. In 2024, Tesla settled a lawsuit that blamed the automaker's driver assistant software for the death of a California man in 2018. The man, Wu Longhong, died after his Tesla Model X veered from a highway in Mountain View, California, and smashed into a concrete median barrier. Mr. Hong's family brought a lawsuit that blamed defects in autopilot for the crash. And next up, an article about media news by Benjamin Molen. CBS News independent watchdog stays quiet amid 60-minute turmoil. With CBS News rocked by controversy, some viewers have turned to the network ombudsman for a public response. So far, they haven't gotten one. When news organizations around the world have faced criticism, they have historically turned to specialists, ombudsmen, in-house critics empowered to investigate their employers' coverage and report their findings to the public. But when CBS News appointed one last year under an agreement with the Federal Communications Commission, it took a different tack. It tapped Kenneth Weinstein to flag complaints privately to its executives, pitching him in the hiring announcements as an independent internal advocate for journalistic integrity and transparency. As CBS News has been shaken by infighting between management and its star correspondents this year, Mr. Weinstein's silence is being criticized by media experts. They say Paramount, the parent company of CBS News, has essentially hired a watchdog who doesn't bark. In the 9 months since he was hired, Mr. Weinstein has issued no public statements about CBS News coverage or its controversies. He has not issued any guidance or feedback in staff-wide emails or memos, 3 employees said. He has told some employees that he is scheduled to work only 1 day per month, though one said he responded to queries outside his monthly workday. Most ombudsmen are much more public-facing, said Jeffrey Vorkin, a former NPR ombudsman who wrote the handbook for the Organization of News Ombudsmen and Standard Editors. That handbook says ombudsmen should report to the public, usually in a weekly column or mutually agreeable time slot. Part of stewarding public trust, as Mr. Weinstein promised to do in his hiring announcement, is addressing the public. What's the point then, he said, of CBS News' decision not to require Mr. Weinstein to publish anything? How is an ombudsman going to convey the public concerns both internally and externally? Paramount said in a statement that Mr. Weinstein has been doing his job. He's there to review concerns about CBS News reporting and coverage through a process that has been clear from the beginning, the statement said. Since September, he's independently assessed the issues brought to him and, when appropriate, discussed them with CBS News and Paramount Skydance leadership. After Mr. Weinstein flags potential problems to Paramount's executives, they decide whether to raise them with CBS News. Since Mr. Weinstein was hired, Bari Weiss, the new editor-in-chief of the network, has been accused of injecting political bias into stories by 3 high-profile journalists for CBS's 60 Minutes. She fired them all as part of a broader shakeup of the show. The remaining 3 correspondents said they would stay only because they didn't want the show to die. CBS News has denied allegations of editorial meddling. Many newsrooms have done away with their ombudsman. The New York Times, which dropped the position in 2017, argued that they were anachronisms and an era of instant online criticism. Others have cited dwindling resources. In addition to the Times, the Washington Post, ESPN, and the Boston Globe did away with their in-house critics in the last quarter century. NPR and PBS are among the last remaining U.S. news organizations that employ a full-time public editor. The FCC announced the creation of the CBS News Ombudsman when it approved Skydance's acquisition of Paramount in July. The agency's chairman, Brendan Carr, had been investigating a complaint about a 60-minute interview with Vice President Kamala Harris from the previous fall, but allowed the deal after the company agreed to employ for 2 years an ombudsman who would evaluate claims of bias. President Trump sued Paramount over the interview. Press freedom advocates said the controversy was baseless. Mr. Carr said the move would promote transparency and increase accountability. In September, Paramount announced that it had found its pick, Mr. Weinstein, a veteran of the Hudson Institute, a right-leaning Washington think tank. Though he had no experience overseeing news coverage, Mr. Weinstein had served on the board of the U.S. Agency for Global Media, an independent federal agency that oversees U.S. government-supported civilian media, such as Voice of America. There, he worked alongside Jeff Shell, who would become Paramount's president. Though Mr. Weinstein does not respond to complaints publicly, he is easy to reach. CBS News set up a website where viewers can submit their concerns anonymously or by name. One of the people said that many of the notes Mr. Weinstein received focused on the network's coverage of the war in Gaza. At least one inquiry Mr. Weinstein has been made public. Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland, a Democrat, sent him a letter in December to ask for a full accounting of the network's decision-making around a November interview with Mr. Trump. But Mr. Weinstein did not reply. Instead, Paramount's general counsel sent a letter to Mr. Raskin explaining that the interview had been edited for length. In December, after a 60-minute correspondent, Sharon Alfonsi accused Ms. Wise of meddling in one of her stories, media critics mused publicly about whether Mr. Weinstein would weigh in. I wonder if the CBS News Ombudsman will have anything to say about this, Brian Stetler, CNN's chief media analyst, wrote on social media. Eric Deggans, the Knight Professor of Journalism and Media Ethics at Washington and Lee University, posted, "Wonder if Wise will ever say exactly why she pulled the story, or if CBS News Ombudsman will somehow surface?" Mr. Carr at least does not seem concerned by the public silence from Mr. Weinstein. This month, after Ms. Wise fired the 3 60-minute correspondents, Mr. Carr was asked directly whether Mr. Weinstein would look into their complaint of the editorial interference. Jake Tapper, an anchor on CNN, sat down with Mr. Carr and pointed out that the FCC had pushed for an ombudsman to evaluate claims of bias and asked whether Mr. Weinstein should investigate. "I don't think so," Mr. Carr said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the last article we'll cover today is written by David McCabe, reporting from Washington. Why Waymo's driverless taxis won't be in your streets anytime soon. The Silicon Valley company's ambitions to roll out anonymous cars nationwide have hit political roadblocks in some of the country's biggest markets. Late last year, a delegation from Waymo met with Governor Kathy Hochul's staff as she considered measures to legalize the company's self-driving taxis in New York. Waymo floated an idea. If New York allowed the company to offer driverless rides to the public, it could provide millions of dollars in benefit taxi drivers and other workers displaced by the technology, according to 3 people with knowledge of the discussions. The proposed funding amounted to about $20 million, one of the people said. But Waymo still failed to head off opposition to its technology from labor groups. Ms. Hochul, a Democrat, introduced a budget proposal in January that would have allowed Waymo to operate in much of the state, excluding the biggest market, New York City. A month later, she withdrew her support after an outcry from groups that represented drivers who quickly declared victory. Billionaire tech bosses underestimate workers at their own peril, said Bharavi Dashi, an executive director of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. Waymo is increasingly facing political roadblocks as it tries to roll out its self-driving taxis powered by artificial intelligence nationwide. After early successes winning over politicians in California, its home state, and elsewhere, Waymo has stumbled in unlocking some of the biggest markets in the country. New York abandoned its proposal to allow self-driving taxis earlier this year. New York City's new mayor, Zohran Mamdani, had said he would heavily weigh the interest of taxi drivers in deciding on rules for the technology. In Illinois, legislation to authorize the service stalled after labor unions protested. And in Washington, the city's council has for years delayed a decision about whether to allow robo-taxis. Those cities and others are central to Waymo's expansion plans as the company pushes its vehicles onto new roads, according to industry analysts and experts. Waymo recently received $16 billion in new funding from investors for expansion, and the company is far ahead of competitors. But in a vacuum of federal rules governing the technology, the company must continue to win over local and state officials to expand. Ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft take off when you can use them. Anywhere you can go, said Gil Laura, the head of technology research at D.I. Davison, a financial services firm. For Waymo to be successful, eventually they're going to have broad, at least national level, regulatory acceptance. Waymo's ambitions have helped start one of the first political fights over AI's real-world ability to replace human workers. Tech executives have proclaimed that AI could put many people out of work, raising fears around the world. California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom last month ordered the state to study how to protect workers from automation. AI's potential for disruption has taken on new significance before the November midterm elections, Voters have grown increasingly weary of the technology's potential to increase energy costs and disrupt the broader economy. That means Waymo must confront anxieties about AI in addition to specific questions about the future of transportation, said Justin Kintz, the company's global head of policy. Our strategy remains the same. We want to meet people in government where they are, Mr. Kintz said, and we know that some of them will take more time than others, but we're committed to our strategy. We're committed to earning trust. The company has raced ahead of rivals, including Zoox, which is owned by Amazon, and Tesla, Elon Musk's electric vehicle manufacturer. Waymo offers driverless rides in 9 cities in California, Arizona, Texas, Florida, and Tennessee. And it works with Uber to offer rides in Atlanta and Austin, Texas. Passengers now pay 500,000 rides every week, more than double a year ago. Waymo, which got its start as Google's experimental self-driving car project in 2009, has long been at the forefront of shaping driverless vehicle laws. It is still owned by Alphabet, Google's parent company. Google advocated for some of the industry's earliest legislative victories. In total, 26 states, including Texas, Florida, and California, now allow vehicles to operate without drivers, according to the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association. But 24 other states allow only testing or have no law governing robotaxis. Momentum to legalize the technology in those states has slowed, and legislative efforts this year that would have allowed automated vehicles in states like Maryland and Virginia failed to advance. One big hurdle, safety concerns. Despite Waymo's argument that its cars cause fewer serious crashes than those driven by a human, critics frequently point to problems. A Waymo car struck a child near a California elementary school in January, resulting in minor injuries. Another car killed a cat in San Francisco. Waymo last month suspended driverless service on freeways and paused rides in several cities over concerns about the car's ability to handle flooded roadways. The company is playing a long game, Mr. Kintz said. Every time someone from New York takes a Waymo in California, Phoenix, or Miami, it makes it more likely those riders will demand approval from lawmakers in their own city as their fear of missing out grows. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 24th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Margaret Mack. Thank you for listening.